This lesson is titled 10 Things You Need to Know About Qualitative Research. This is one of the lessons in the program titled Understanding Qualitative Research. In this specific lesson, I will address the 10 things you need to know about qualitative research, and I'll wrap it up with a reflective summary. Before I get into the first item of the 10, I wanted to let you know the rationale for why these 10 things, if you will, these 10 pieces of information are in this program. Over the years, I have been involved with many conversations of both academic, qualified people. These are faculty, scholars, people who do research at the academic level. I've had the opportunity to work on grants and where I worked with others who are not necessarily experts in research teaching, but in doing. They all have degrees in research, they have PhDs in research, and there's this common misperception about qualitative research. And I'm going to share some of those so you know even more about qualitative research when you're done with this program. The first one is that the results are the meaning of the many. And what that means to me is that you're going to have to do a lot of interviews. And from interviews, you're going to get a lot of information. Just imagine it if you're going to ask 20 questions or even only 10 interview questions of 20 people. That's going to be a lot of narrative information that you're going to have to sift through. So you're going to have to take the results and distill them down into some sort of meaning, which is representation of the whole. Even if you're only interviewing 12 people and you achieve data saturation, you're still going to have a lot of information to have to synthesize and then analyze and evaluate. In some of the research designs in qualitative research, as you will learn in this lesson strategy for this program, Understand Qualitative Research, there are many different types of design, such as a narrative design or a biography design, which has a lot of information, not only from interviews, but it could be from journal articles. It could also be from newspaper articles, from videos, from any conversations that are documented and any conversations that you have with people besides interviews. So there's many different stories that people will tell in different types of research that you'll have to capture. So as you start to look at qualitative research, understand that it is a lot of work. It can certainly be meaningful work. It can be fun work. And when you produce something out of all that information you've collected, that can be quite the finding. And sometimes it's finding that needle in a haystack almost, where you find something that you didn't expect. And all of a sudden you realize why you did the research. Most of us will start our research with some understanding or thought about what we will find from the results, but oftentimes we find things we never expected. I think that's the true value of qualitative research. I always ask every student who's getting ready to graduate with their PhDs or whatever doctorate degree they have, what is one thing that they found out in the data analysis that they didn't expect? That's usually the reason and the opportunity to produce a journal article, but it's that piece of learning when you get something from research you didn't expect. The second one is qualitative research is not as simple as many believe it to be. When I first started doing research, when I was a student, I thought that quantitative research would be very difficult. And I also thought that qualitative research would be difficult, but perhaps not as much. And now maybe that had something to do with me not really understanding how to do statistics. But qualitative research, while in the surface, looking at it may seem simple, but when you have all that data to go through, not only that, but you have to do all sorts of different testing, such as doing a field test. You might have to do expert testing of your questions. You might have to do different types of member checking. You might have to do data saturation testing. All these complementary tests and supplemental pieces that you have to do in qualitative research add up. And while it doesn't take a lot of time and a lot of effort, if you've never done it before, let me tell you, it could take some time. When I talk with quantitative research experts, and I do some quantitative research, when I do a lot of it for clients, I have an expert quantitative researcher. She works with me. I do the qualitative part. We're a good team that way. But I do believe that the quantitative research is easy, particularly if, and I'll caption that, if you already have a survey. Now, if you have to create your own survey, like I did with my research partner based on my book, we created a survey instrument titled Supervisor Leadership and Communication Inventory. It has 72 Likert type questions. That took a while to produce and then test for validity and reliability. So that did take some time. But most people, I think, early on will think, oh, qualitative research, it's pretty simple. You just look at a couple, reports, and some magazines, some journal articles, interview a couple people, and put it together. Well, it's not that simple. And it's not as quick as many believe. I know with doctoral students working on a dissertation, once they get their approval to start collecting data, it may take them only about 7 or 10 days, because all it takes is to send a bunch of emails out. Somebody goes in and does the Likert type survey responses in something perhaps like SurveyMonkey.com. Hundreds of people, thousands of people could do it within a week and get the results. Then all of a sudden, all you have to do is convert it into SPSS, run the analysis, and write your work. Whereas qualitative researchers, if they have to interview 20 people, within that same week or 10 days, they're lucky if they interviewed 3 or 4 people, let alone did all the transcriptions and all the work that needs to be done. So when you start thinking about, qualitative research might be a little easier than quantitative research, would not necessarily fall into that trap. And think about it in the sense that if you want to get done quickly, you might want to do quantitative research if you have, for a doctoral dissertation, a survey that's already tested for validity and reliability, and you can extend the knowledge into some other application. But if you're going to do qualitative research, just understand it's probably going to take you a little more time than you thought, and definitely more time than quantitative research. But again, doing qualitative research, as in doing quantitative research, can be rewarding. Most of the time, my work with students, they find it rewarding at the end of the process because they were studying something that was important to them. Same thing in corporate research. Most people, when they're done with a project, they find the results extremely interesting and enjoyable work along the way because it's something they have an interest in. If you're doing grant research, you happen to be doing research perhaps even on vaccines. Well, that's what people do for their living. That's their careers. I'm certainly hoping that they like what they're doing. The fourth item I have here is that different designs have different rigor. In this program, you'll see that there are many lessons on the different types of qualitative research designs, such as a case study, phenomenological study. You'll see others on the biography type design, the narrative design. All these different designs have a different level of rigor. Some are more rigorous in the sense of what's required in scholarly information that must be included, and that's why not all qualitative research designs are appropriate for doctoral dissertation work. In this program about understanding qualitative research, my goal is to help you become a better informed consumer of qualitative research, not just an expert in dissertation research. There's a big difference in many different ways of just what's research and what's dissertation-worthy research. That's also something that many faculty and students need to understand, because oftentimes a student may want to propose doing work that's not really significant or substantial. While it is good research, it may not be of the rigor to produce that significant, substantial finding, which is required in the academic exercises in earning that PhD. So as you start to look at the different designs, get an understanding for the different rigor, particularly for the one that you might want to apply. I've had a lot of students come up to me over the years and say they want to apply a grounded theory qualitative design. And I'm saying that's okay to them when I hear that, but I also tell them I will not work with them on that. I won't be their dissertation chair committee member, because very rarely can a doctoral student in a doctorate degree program complete grounded theory in the time allotted. Creating a new theory is not as simple as just interviewing people and finding out what they had to say and suggesting something. I created a couple of theories, and it took me a long time, one of them over a year. So as you start to look at the designs, in this program, as you go through them, you'll understand better the different levels of rigor and what might be best or perhaps not best for your situation when and if you're doing qualitative research or if you're guiding others to do it. Now, the fifth item is important to understand that much in qualitative research is subjective. I have alluded about this in the different lessons in the program. So don't be surprised if you hear this again many times, because I believe it's important that you understand as a consumer of qualitative research that research in qualitative projects will be subjective. It's subjective to the researcher. It's subjective to the people who give you input if you interview people, or even if you observe what they're doing. That is subjective in how they're acting and how you're observing them. It's also subjective in the analysis. Even if other people are involved, like a dissertation chair, committee members, or there's some review panel of your dissertation in a corporate environment, or if you're doing research in some other professional field. The idea with qualitative research is that you're gaining insights, perhaps lived experiences from people, and they may not truthfully be able to recall exactly what happened to them. So you're getting their best guess oftentimes. And when you read an article, and I read an article, I might get something different from it than you because of my background, because of how I'm trained and how I'm educated, which is a little bit different than you. There's nothing wrong with that. That variation is good. We can help reduce the limitations of such subjectivity, but we have to do it in a way where we bring more than one person in to do the data analysis, perhaps, and even be involved with the questioning of people. So as you start to look about qualitative research, don't be surprised if you produce a great report and somebody says, oh, I don't see it that way. I would have come up with different findings. That's okay. Many of us come from different schools of thought. That's why in much research, particularly dissertation research, students will identify a framework, a theoretical or conceptual framework which grounds the study, and it helps produce more alignment with where the subjectivity of work comes from. Because if you're going to do a dissertation and it's going to be grounded in a conceptual theory of transformational leadership, I'll have a better understanding at why you have some of your questions and how some of the results are, as compared if you were going to ground your work in the great man theory of leadership, that you would probably have different questions and different results. This is important in item number 6, is not to seek feelings. When I have put together the lessons in this program on the different research designed specifically for a case study and phenomenology, I've indicated do not seek feelings when you're asking people questions. When you're interviewing them, stay away from feelings unless you are a psychologist or you're in a psychology program and you're being led by faculty who are psychologists. Most people who are not psychologists do not have the wherewithal, meaning the knowledge and the skills to assess feelings correctly. Feelings are a little murky in the sense that it's not as clearly identifiable as perhaps a lived experience is if you're asking for somebody's assumptions, beliefs, or perceptions. Oftentimes, people use the word feelings incorrectly when they mean what their assumptions are or what their experiences were. So as you start to do more with qualitative research, and whether it's going to be from mentoring people or you're going to be doing your own research, whether it be in an academic setting as a student or in the corporate environment, keep in mind, what do you want to learn from people? Do you really want to know what they feel? In a psychology-based program, more than likely you do, because that's what psychology often deals with, is the feelings of people, where more times than not in non-psychology programs, we're not looking for feelings, but we're looking for what they did, what they thought about it. There's a difference between what people think and what they feel. The 7th of the 10 items I'm going to address in this specific lesson is about coding, whether you use a computer program or do it manual. With all the different interview data you're going to get, again, if you were going to interview 20 people and you had 20 interview questions, that's a lot of data to manage. What I suggest people do is a variation or combination of coding. For example, I will refer my students, and even when I do qualitative research, I will do hand coding. I will do hand coding from one interview to the next. I will literally take notes on what has transpired from one interview to the next when something's repetitive. If I hear something in the second, third, and fourth interview that the first person said, or from anywhere in that stream of interviews, I'll make little notes, and I may put a check mark next to it every time I hear something similar. Now, when you get a transcript from one person and you put it into NVivo and then add the others, what NVivo does is basically the same thing. It looks for common words, common phrases, and then it highlights them as perhaps what they call nodes. You might produce them as themes when you do your work. But the idea of coding is, how are you taking all the vast amounts of qualitative information and putting it down into some sort of meaning, distilling the much information to the meaning of what that all meant to not only you and perhaps the people that were involved. So coding is important, and you should understand what different types of coding are. There are different types of manual coding. You can do it hand coding, as I mentioned. There's another way of doing manual coding in the sense that you can use what I refer to as an affinity diagram and look for common like categories, and then put information on it like a title for what those common categories mean. That will produce basically the same concept of themes, but you need to know how to do it if you've never done it before. So if you're going to do qualitative research or guide others to do it, I encourage you to pick up a couple books and learn more about coding and the different types. The eighth item I'll address here is understand and apply trustworthiness factors. In qualitative research, it's important to understand how you can improve your work and what we call trustworthiness, in the sense that producing something that's going to be reliable and valid. In quantitative research, we'll look to test for validity and reliability of a research instrument such as a Likert type survey. But in qualitative research, we don't use that terminology, although some may loosely or maybe incorrectly. But what we're looking for in trustworthiness is the dependability, the credibility, the confirmability, and the transferability. These are trustworthiness factors, and there's 4 of them. I just want to highlight it here and let you know I have a complete lesson in this program about trustworthiness. And I address all the 4 factors and the evidence which suggests those factors. So you can address the factors with evidence. So take a listen over there at that lesson to learn more about trustworthiness. But I wanted to make sure that in this overview that you understand that trustworthiness is how we help determine the outcome to be realistic and be something that's as truthful as potentially can be. Now, the 9th item about things you need to know about qualitative research is to become an informed consumer of qualitative research. This lesson strategy, all these different lessons in my program that you're listening to, Understanding Qualitative Research, will help you become a better informed consumer of research, no doubt. That's one of the main reasons I created this program to begin with, because I believe you have to be an informed consumer of qualitative research before you can be a good researcher. And the same is true of quantitative research. If you're not an informed consumer, how can you understand the terminology? How can you understand the applications? Becoming an informed consumer of qualitative research means you understand the vocabulary. So if somebody says what a field test is, or an expert panel testing, or if they say member checking or testing for data saturation, that you automatically know what those mean. If you're going to do an exploratory case study as compared to an explanatory case study, that you understand the difference between exploratory and explanatory, how to write the interview questions differently based on how you would differently write the research questions. Becoming an informed consumer of research can be done by sitting through any kind of research classes, seminars, being involved in watching what's happening from experts when they speak, perhaps in person or online. There's a lot of opportunity these days for us to learn through YouTube and many other video applications and programs. There's books that you can read online. If you're going to become a researcher, become a good one. And I tell students the same thing. If you're going to become a doctoral prepared person, become a good one. And that means becoming and understanding how an expert is developed. If you want to become an expert, you have to understand how to develop yourself. And there are many different ways to become an informed consumer of research. And the final lesson in this strategy is begin with the end in mind. And what I mean here is that if you truly understand the concept of being informed as a consumer of qualitative research, look at what's required to become that expert, but also begin with the end in mind of a research study. All too often, a student in a doctorate program has never done research before, so they don't know really what the end really is. But a lot of times I'll get students who say they want to have, in a qualitative research study, 2, 3, or 4 research questions. I help them understand that that is going to cause far more work at the end when you have to analyze the data than if you only have one central research question and you take the other information and put it as interview questions. There's no one way to do qualitative research, but the analysis part can be quite complex and quite different if you have multiple central research questions, because you have to analyze everything differently for alignment. Where if you have what I consider one overarching, or some people call it Cadillac, research question, and then all the other questions be interview questions, the analysis at the end is easier, streamlined, as compared to if you have more than one central research question. You may not know this if you're a student, if nobody helps you understand this. Even as a faculty member, if you've only done research with one qualitative research question and all of a sudden a student says they want to do 2 or 3, it's a lot more work. You may not understand it. It's not like quantitative research where you could have multiple research questions. The analysis of the data is not going to be any more difficult at the end as compared to qualitative research. In quantitative research, I've had students with as many as 11 independent variables and 11 central research questions. But the survey that they used produced the findings in that alignment order, where qualitative research is not quite the same. So if you've never done qualitative research before, I encourage you to learn more. Read maybe published dissertations of how somebody did their work. Talk with them, the authors of those dissertations. Talk with qualitative experts who oversee, mentor, and chair and guide others in how to do qualitative research. The more you can understand about the process, the easier it's going to be to transition through that process. I put these 10 things you need to know about qualitative research early in the program of understanding qualitative research. I wanted to give you a little insight on these 10 items to be concerned with as you go through this lesson strategy. If you've taken good notes here on these 10 items, you will hear almost all of them repeated throughout this series, many of them on multiple times in multiple lessons, because they're so important. 10 things you need to know about qualitative research could have simply also been 100 things you need to know about qualitative research, but all those other 90 are really subsumed in the lessons of this program. And I really didn't want to take the time and make you sit through 100 different things when you're going to gain them at a much deeper level throughout the lesson strategy. Remember, one of the items I talked about is qualitative research is subjective. This is my subjective view based on my 20 plus years of experience as a dissertation chair, and also add on to that my other research that I do and in the corporate world during that time, and what I did before I became a dissertation chair with my own research in my thesis, in my master's program, as well as my own PhD, where I did a mixed method study. So with that, I want to thank you for listening to this lesson. I wish you well.